Okay, so you got the message. We are recording. This is our monthly Cosmobiology Institute research meeting. We've had a few meetings. I think this is what, about our fourth meeting or so. And we're ready to start doing some research. And I've gotten ideas from two of you on research projects that you want to do. Um, and I have similar questions about both research projects. So you can type in the chat area any thoughts, questions, ideas that you have. Um, I want to jump right into these research projects. Greg, is it okay if we get right into your research project that you are thinking about undertaking? Are we good, Greg? Can you hear me? You can type in the chat or unmute yourself. Um, Not seeing anything in the chat. Okay. You all do hear me, right? Everything's
I,
good?
I, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Okay,
I was
great.
struggling to find the unmute button.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So I'm going to go over just briefly some of your ideas for your research and some of the questions that I have. I also sent you an email about it.
Yeah, I
Um,
read it.
okay, good. Okay. Oh, before I get started, oh no, let me just skip this for now. This may take me a while. All right. Our goal is to begin conducting research. Let's talk about what Greg is doing. Um, Greg is an astrologer, and he's got a lot of the common things that astrologers experience. He does charts, the charts work, and he'd like to more formally test the ideas. So, um, what he's first, he had this big plan for testing astrology. I suggested it'd be maybe better to narrow down to some more specific questions. So now he's thinking about testing houses, house systems, Placidus versus Koch versus equal versus whole sign, etc. So is this a good research project? Yes, it's a fabulous research project. Why? Because what is the purpose of research? To improve understanding. Are houses something that we need to improve understanding about? Definitely. Everybody's using different house systems. If somebody could use modern research methods to help sort out which house systems work or how they work differently, any kind of application of modern research methods to figure this out would be marvelous. So I love the topic. It's something we need clarification about. Um, so basically, what he's planning to do is he uses rulerships. Lots of people use rulerships, makes sense. So if we look at, say, Christopher's chart, he has Gemini on the second house. Mercury rules the second house. It's in the 12th house in Taurus. This is part of standard interpretation. It's used in medieval astrology, modern Western astrology, Vedic astrology, the idea of rulers, house cusps. It's um, very widely used and a lot of different opinions about it. Okay, so he wants to research this. If you're a practicing astrologer and you use similar ideas, how can we test it using modern research methods? It's a big question. There's a lot of different things to think about. Um, so the topic is wonderful. Let's see what Greg's thoughts are about it. Um, Basically, what he's done is, I'll just summarize, he's sent me some additional files, is he's looked at the lives of people and he said, okay, according to one house system, we have Gemini on the second house cusp, but another um, house system maybe have Taurus, so the ruling planet is different. And we can compare house systems to see which interpretation works better. It's exactly what astrologers do. Now, how do we apply modern research methods to this question? It's something astrologers do. They find which house system works for them. They're happy with it. What's the big deal with modern research methods to help clarify this? Well, here's the one big issue is this. Um, so I wrote here, focusing on house systems is a great idea, different opinions. Um, here's a big question, if you're using modern research methods, is can, I'll make this big and bold, can someone else replicate the study? Okay, so that's a very clear guideline for your research. If someone else, and there's two parts to this. One is if they use the same data, if they use the same people, in other words, will they reach the same conclusion? Um, this is the big question because if your analysis is not defined clearly enough, different people will reach different conclusions. So if I say Christopher has Mercury ruling the second house, and second house has to do with finances, and it's in the 12th house, and the 12th house is bad, or there's hidden money issues, I'm going to have even we have to clearly define what each house does, what the expectation is for each planet in each house. If you interpret impromptu, like if you just interpret on the spot, you could make up anything you want. So this research study is going to require a lot of definitions. It's going to require definition of what each house does, what the ruling planet of each sign and house, what it would do, um, or at least some basic principles from which the specifics could be derived. Because somebody else needs to, if another researcher goes in, they want to replicate your study, even using the same data to see exactly what you did and see how clear the conclusions are. Is that clear to everybody? Right? This is just like really fundamental stuff that sets some clear rules for what it means to use modern research methods. If somebody's going to replicate the study and come up with different conclusions, then it's like a shouting match, which is what astrologers do. So it's going to require a lot of definitions. That's fine. That's just a lot of work. Now, another issue is what constitutes a big part of a person's life. If I ask Christopher, oh, do you have hidden money issues or something like that, whatever ruler of the second house in the 12th house is supposed to mean, how do we know if that's true or not? If we're using famous people, I would expect that it might show up in the biography. So we're going to have to define how we determine whether something is true. If you reference some event in a person's life and there's extensive biography, then people will say, well, I replicated your study and that was just one minor incident. So these are very subjective things that we have to give um, some way of what we call an operational definition, some way of making it concrete so other people will reach the same conclusion. That's the main challenge of a lot of astrological research when you're doing you, these kind of assessments. And so a clear way to check yourself is to say, if I, after I do my research, if I give this paper to another person and they go through the process, can they at least appreciate that I have a very strong argument for what I said about that? Or does it appear that I'm just randomly picking little arbitrary things in the person's life and saying, oh, yeah, there it is? Um, so, ways to make this work is to quote biographies. So, if we say Mercury in the second, rule of the second house in the 12th means a certain thing, you have clearly defined rules, and then you would quote some biographical information and state the context of it. Another thing is you do not want to uh, sound like you're in a debate, like you're trying to prove your point. You're trying to assess the data in a kind of neutral standpoint and see if the data supports your theory. So you want to have honesty and integrity in the way that you're looking at it. Does all this make sense? Is everybody following me? Is this kind of obvious? But I had another Desdale, you're doing a research project, and I had the same questions for you. Like, how clear is it that the person is reflecting the behaviors or personality traits that you want, and having some clear rules that people can follow. How you make these clear rules that people can at least say, yes, I fully appreciate your argument. It's a good argument. Um, and not think that you just went off on some tangent trying to prove your point. Um, it's not easy, and I don't have all the answers, but that's the challenge in this kind of research design. Okay. Um, does that make sense to you all? Anybody want to unmute or type in the chat? Are we good?
I have a question, Dave. Or,
Yeah.
well, it's a statement. It's a statement, and then it pertains to research, is because in researching the house systems, and since I've been involved with astrology since the late 70s, house systems have always been in contention. So it's something that I've thought about over the years. But in Chris' research project, when he starts mixing, he wants to compare all the house systems. What if in his research we're actually truly looking at two different phenomena? Because like all the new kids are moving to the whole sign house system, but there may be a different mechanism going on that since you're doing whole signs, every house cusp is making a Ptolemaic aspect to the Aries point, so that may be a different mechanism that's being taken in place. So then I would say that may be a different mechanism. So then I would say I would like to narrow it down more. What if we just looks at just the quadrant-based house systems, and saying then where if the intermediate house cusps actually do change rulership, you might be able to dig into that more and not be testing two different mechanisms at work.
That's a great point and a great, I guess we'd call it question or topic. Here's my response to that. This is an excellent point, is that um, what Greg would be doing is testing his idea about what houses do. And he's going to test whether different house systems do what he expects them to do. He is not evaluating whether the house systems work or not in general. He's not testing whether whole sign houses work differently and are valid and tell us something that he's not asking about. Most research projects, actually all research projects, answer specific questions. They do not answer thousands of other questions. So he has a certain way that he does astrology and certain expectations that he has. He can use whole sign houses and say that whole sign houses did not deliver the kind of information that he's looking for. In his conclusions, he should state that whole sign houses are created very differently. They may operate differently, and they may work in some other fashion than in the way he was looking at it. That would be important because they're conceptually very different. But it's perfectly okay to test a variety of things and see if they will deliver what you're interested in. So, final answer is I would say, and others of you can chime in, it's not like I'm the fount of perfect knowledge here, but my view of it is he can do it and understand that different house systems, even different quadrant house systems, may tell you different things, and they may be valid in some way that he's not testing. And
Dave,
that's,
may I chime in for a minute?
yeah,
Yeah, the primary premise that I'm looking at is the interpretation that the natal house, the sign, a planet and its sign in house describes a specific life lesson. I don't look at personality traits for that. I look at specific life lessons, and based on even I quoted my research paper about what Steve Force says about it, or Dane Redger said about it, that the natal houses actually represent crisis, difficulties to overcome that force you to change your behavior as part of your spiritual evolution. So what I'm looking at from a natal house perspective is when you go into the autobiography or the biography, you're going to find out if Saturn's in the seventh house in one system and the sixth house in the other system. When Saturn's being triggered, whether it's progressions, solar arcs, transits, are you having marital issues, partnership issues, or is it work related issues? But being able to, from the biography, be able to find out what's the type of problems and issues they're dealing with when those planets are being triggered, and therefore which house, natal house, appears to be more valid than the other. So I'm focusing on it from that point of view.
Yeah.
Like what David said, I'm not trying to debate the different house systems themselves as much as in the different systems, where do the planets fall, and do those houses correspond to life events and transits, solar arcs, progressions that trigger those planets? Does all that correspond to show that it's all related? So that's my focus.
Right. Yeah, and that's perfect because you have a very clear focus that you're looking at life lessons, you're not looking at personality, you're not looking at this, and you're seeing which house system delivers the information that you are expecting using, your theoretical framework, your understanding. That's exactly what most research should do. You want to answer a specific question. You can't really answer big, broad, giant questions. That's why research institutes spend billions of dollars for decades, inching along. So yeah, that's perfect. So does that I'm not sure who I was talking to with that question. I who brought up that excellent point?
Oh, I think that was me, Dave. But if I could chime in, another thing on this. This is sort of a research question in general, because I do remember Greg's from last session, and he was talking about that there was different spiritual things that he was looking into. So I wanted to ask this question because this was bothering me, and I'm new to research, so I don't know what I'm doing. Just been a practicing astrologer forever and a teacher, but. Um, when he was going for spiritual ideas, and I'm familiar with Roger and Stephen Forrest and this kind of spiritual ideas, but when you're trying to do research on biographies, what in the case where it's biographies, a person's personal, these personal things that these nature things and these spiritual kind of things and these lessons and growth things that Greg was talking about last session, these don't necessarily flush out in biography. They might be private, and a lot of times biographies are, they're trying to make a public point, or they're trying to put the person in a good light. How do we research these things? I mean, I was thinking about Greg's research project last week, and maybe if he had a questionnaire with a practicing astrologers that actually, can ask these, in their hour with their client, they will touch on some of these things that are not necessarily out for the public. We could answer some questionnaire for him or something like that.
Yes, no, you're exactly right. Some things are more amenable to research than other things. Anything that has to do with the person's inner world or how they're interpreting or experiencing is very difficult to measure and very, very difficult to get access to. But I think the examples that Greg just gave of issues related to marriage versus issues related to work, it seems like even though it's a life lesson and a spiritual development, in the way he just explained it, it seems like it's concrete enough as well that he could research it. But if it wasn't, fairly concrete and then you'd have to use questionnaires, and questionnaires get difficult. You have to have a control group. One of the things that James Randi, this guy who's anti-astrology, he does is he gives computerized interpretations to people, and they agree with the interpretation, even though he gave them the interpretation for somebody else. So, he has a class of 30 college students, and he gives them all the interpretation for somebody else, and they always agree with it. So sometimes people will see truth. Anyway, you'd have to have some kind of control for that. It'd be very difficult. But Greg, it sounds like even though you're looking at inner development, soul development, spiritual lessons, there's also something fairly concrete in the person's life that you can sense from the biography. Is that correct? Are you trying to unmute again, Greg?
There we go. Okay, I'm not looking, when I'm talking spiritual, I don't mean religious or their spiritual beliefs. I'll give an example from my own chart. One of my life lessons, because of the way I grew up with my family's religion, the way the culture we come from Southeast Kentucky. Man works, wife stays home, takes care of the kids and everything. You each have well-defined roles and jobs. My son's conjunct Saturn in my 5th house. My son rules my 2nd house. Now, the way I do my interpretation, they're in Sagittarius. So when I see a planet in Sagittarius, I see that you have a very limited view of things. And the goal of Sagittarius is to expand your worldview, to bring in experiences where you're going to see things from a much broader experience. I had a very narrow worldview of myself, the sun ruling the 2nd house, as the wage earner. Saturn, which is how you having a limited view of my roles, responsibilities, Saturn rules my 7th house. I'm the wage earner. My wife has her roles. She's the one responsible for our children. So what happened, I got on the corporate fast track and devoted my life to my career, leaving her to take care of the kids on her own. Finally, she'd had enough. We got divorced. I found myself a single dad with full custody of 3 kids, had to get off the fast track and take care of them. And the experiences I went through, those crisis years, turned me around, made me see things from a totally different view, to where suddenly my kids became more important than my career. So that was my spiritual lesson as far as my son.
Right. So these are concrete, real life experiences.
Yes. And
so the question is, the question
issues have they correlate to specific triggers of the sun and Saturn, especially Pluto, which rules my 5th house that it's in. When Pluto hit Saturn and my sun, I wound up in court over battles with my children. And even the divorce was when I had my progressed moon in my 7th house, exactly to the degree and minute sextile my
right.
Saturn.
Okay. Yeah. I think we all have the idea, and so it is concrete, and you can test it. We still have these questions remaining of how do you make a research study that if somebody else replicates what you did, that they draw essentially the same conclusions. In other words, it's clear enough. Like, you have to have a set of rules. Like, you could look at, first of all, how are you going to select the people is a question. You have to have some kind of way of selecting the people that's, random selection or whatever. And then how do you define the events? You're just going to have to define a lot of things to make it very clear.
Yes.
Do you have
a glossary that explains the meaning of the symbols?
No. Let's get on to something else. Okay, I already mentioned you can take care of that, but how are you going to select the people whose charts you're going to analyze? Like you mentioned.
Okay, yes. I don't have any specific method for specific charts, as much as I only want to use charts with a AA Rodden rating.
Okay, so you're going to have to
look for people who, basically what I did, I went to Half Price Books and looked, who can I find good biographies on? I went home with an armload.
What you need to do, you have to have a well-defined procedure that other people can follow for how you select the data.
Yes.
If your procedure is you used a certain book and you took all the people with AA data, you have to have a well-defined procedure and you can't skip anybody. So you have to set up a well-defined procedure for what charts you're going to use.
Yes.
Has to be crystal clear so that a 10-year-old can go in and say, oh, I know what to do. I need to buy this book. I need to go through the list, blah, blah, blah. You have to remove any subjectivity in who these people are that you're going to analyze. And then you have to set up a procedure for exactly how you're going to do this. You might want to do it where you pick only events in the person's life. And you also need to define how you define those events. For example, you can use a Wikipedia article, and every event that's given at least 3 sentences you're including. See, the unfortunate thing about research is you cannot leave anything to subjective evaluation. You need to set up rules for how exactly you're doing everything. So if you say I'm using all people with AA data that have at least, several pages of information on Wikipedia, and I'm going to use the Wikipedia article and every event in their lives that's given at least 3 sentences will be included as an event. And then you can look at the transits of those events and then see which ones fit which house systems. But you're going to have to set up very, very clear rules so that anybody can replicate the study.
Correct.
It's your main challenge.
Can I say
If somebody
something?
else replicates it, they will see exactly what you did, and they will pretty much agree with everything you did. I mean, there's always some minor disagreements, but they will understand your logic, they'll understand the reasoning, and they'll say, okay, I get it. He's made a good argument. You have to make a good, clear argument for it.
Can I say something?
Yes.
At a very basic level, astrology is a symbolic, subjective, and individualized thing that we do. Comparing to the EBR, it's measurable. It's more assigned to objective data. A lot of what we do is just symbolism and subjective. How do you measure that? Even when you take something from another information, like we say that Pisces are compassionate, how do we know that? And then we bring it into something else in our studies. At the very core, we are at a conflict with the system.
Right. Now, that's exactly the challenge. The challenge is you have to give what they used to call operational definitions. You have to give some kind of concrete, measurable way of approaching something. Like with intelligence, they came up with an IQ test. They're able to put a number on it. You have to have some measurable way of defining these states and clear and unambiguous procedures for what you're selecting. I mean, that's the
But isn't what we are doing copying from other systems, doing the things from other systems? Is it relatable to us as astrologers? And is it measurable? Is it a thing that we can use on our side? At our very core, we are very subjective. Even when you ask the question to the person before me, it was talking about Saturn in the 7th house, and that's a lot of correlation.
Right. Let me just interrupt. Let me interrupt and just say something there's lots of successful research in astrology. People have succeeded in meeting these challenges. We have lots of successful research. Christopher, you're here, you're familiar with some of the successful research where it's already been done. So it's not a theoretical question. People have gone in, given measurable behavior to things, and gotten very clear results. It can be done. It's challenging. It's difficult.
Name me a successful research, because I've yet to see one that has the one that can measure astrology at its very core, inherent value of astrology is very subjective
No, yeah,
compared to
there's lots of
EBR.
yeah, no, there are lots of
EBR is very is a measurable thing. It's objective,
yeah,
and you have to use that to measure astrology.
there are lots of studies. You know, my bipolar disorder research is an example. There's lots of them. Christopher, do you want to mention a few of studies that
Yeah,
have
you give me
Yeah,
a few of them of astrology that
yeah.
do the
I,
test as the standard test as that all the other entities do,
the one that I've done
and
that I would
and
most
that is
recommend,
workable.
right? The one that I've done that I have done that is most impressive is the bipolar
Let
disorder
us
research.
eliminate
And
what you have done. Let us eliminate what others have done, just to
okay,
make it.
Christopher, do you want to share some research done by other people that
sure.
strongly,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Uh, there was this great study done by this female French scientist, and it removed some human bias by doing the study on pedigree dogs. And the amazing thing here is the breeders of these dogs, for the first 2 months of the dog's life, they keep very extensive journals of the dog's behavior. And using a method developed by the late Hans Eysenck, those behaviors can be translated into psychological terminology. But the other thing is the breeders, they not only record things like the order in which each pup was born in the litter, they also record the exact time of birth. So they were, all these pedigree dogs had AA Rodden ratings. They could set up very precise horoscopes for each one. And what was found was the dogs that exhibited what they call extroverted dominant behavior, they were significantly more likely to have either Sun or Jupiter on one of the four angles of the chart. And, it was a highly significant result. And that's just one of many. Another one I like that removed like human bias was done by the late Dr. Johnson Holt. And then Robert Curry did a follow-up study. And this was in mundane astrology, where Dr. Holt used a website called onthisday.com, which has nothing to do with astrology. But what was nice about this website is for any year over a wide span of years, uh, that website would list the big news stories for the year. So you can go in year by year and count up how many big news stories were there. And Dr. Holt found that when the outer planets were forming, when a lot of them were forming either conjunctions or oppositions with one another, you got a lot more big news stories in that year.
Wow.
And when you weren't doing that, you got fewer news stories. And Robert Curry, in his follow-up study, showed that there's an orb effect. The closer those outer planets got to conjunction or opposition, the number of news stories would go up again, as
Wow.
opposed to when it was a weak conjunction or opposition. So there's a whole lot of studies out there that I would quote. People have been very clever in designing these things and removing various sources of bias.
Uh, Chris, sorry dear, what method or apparatus that they use to get that information? Did they randomly get the information? Did they do any double-blinded
No, no, and
apparatus? Did they do any of those stuff that would be standard to the test that we is acceptable by the establishment?
this was
And there seemed to be some bias coming from that.
the
Both
website
angles right there.
had
And you
nothing
cannot eliminate bias through all of this. There's going to be bias in all of it. You just like you got to say bias that happen to be right. Because
Yeah.
I don't see where we can eliminate bias in all of this study.
Maybe you can't eliminate it completely, but you can certainly reduce the possibility of various kinds of bias. And this website that was used had nothing to do with astrology. It was just a standard news website that at the end of the year would list, major news stories for that year. So there was no reason to suspect that this website somehow was colluding with astrologers. And of course, once you decide on what orb to use, determining the number of conjunctions or oppositions between outer planets, that's a purely mechanical procedure. And setting it up in that way, they found some very, very significant results. And the fact that Robert Curry in his follow-up study was able to show that there was this orb effect there, that makes it less likely that Dr. Holt's initial findings were just a statistical artifact or work that happened by chance.
Yeah, so this research that Christopher is talking about, it meets the standards for academic research. In any research, even medical research, there's Desdale is correct. There's always some bias. There's always some problems. And the research is never 100% perfect, and we never draw 100% confidence in any research. It's just a matter of, is the research done with enough controls and enough care that we learn something from it? And the answer is yes. That's been done in medicine, it's done in psychology, and it's being done in astrology.
Yeah, and your study on bipolar disorder, that's another example I hold up as a example of a fine study that's done. And our friend Vincent Godbout, he developed that program where keywords get assigned to all the different elements in astrological chart, and he was able to use that to do a chart matching experiment, which removed the human bias since it was just this artificial intelligence module. He had gotten into this astrology program that would compare keywords from the chart with keywords extracted from biographies, and it was able to successfully match up natal charts and biographies. And that removed a good deal of human bias. Railroad crossing. So it can be done, but as you suggest, quite often we don't prove anything conclusively. We just find more and more evidence that gives us more and more confidence in one conclusion rather than another.
Right. It's all about confidence levels. Like Christopher said, the follow-up study by Robert on Dr. Holt's study increases our confidence that this is a real thing. So it's research is it's for the very persistent people. It's hard, it's long, you've got to be tough. We used to say, we should have only Marines doing research or something. Somebody's gone through boot camp. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of tenacity. There's very difficult problems, but if you stick to it and you keep trying, people have made remarkable success. And so, Christopher, thanks for sharing some examples. Very exciting stuff. Yeah. Okay, so what we're seeing here with Greg's research proposal is a fairly typical example where you have to use a lot of clever thinking, persistence, to figure out how to make the point, that these things work. So yeah, the way you gather the data, the way you define it, all this stuff is very, very important. What Vincent Godbout did with his using words, I don't know how many years, like 10 years he's been working on that, like pretty constantly, enormous amount of work to build his model. It's just, enormous. Um, okay. So yeah, I hope we have some useful conclusions from this discussion about, you know, the steps in doing research and what's accomplished in research. Going back to the question about um, whole sign houses versus quadrant houses. So Dave, that answer that I gave about it's just going to tell you whether Greg's question works with certain houses. That's all it's going to do. Doesn't answer the broader questions about whole sign houses may work in some other way. Does that answer your question well?
Yeah, it answers my question. I just, again, like new to research, I didn't know what he was going for. But boy, do I want to know that big question.
Don't we all? Yeah. Little by little, stone by stone, we get to we get to understand more and more. Okay. Are there any other we've got 45 more minutes, we're halfway through. Any more research projects, general questions, topics you guys have in mind? If not, I can bring up some things that I'm working on and issues that I'm dealing with in current research, or Christopher or anybody else doing research could share some ideas on what they're doing. We're good. No other questions. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Um, I can share what I'm doing with,
Can I
yeah,
say something?
yeah.
Um, how would you apply with your research? How would you do random? How do you come up with a system that you would random test astrology in any one of its subject matters?
The one big breakthrough that I think relates to your question is the shuffled control group. This idea came out about 15 or 20 years ago. And it's been, just an incredible breakthrough for astrological research. And it's such a simple idea. I don't know how we missed it for so long, but somebody came up with the obvious thing, which is this only works for certain kinds of research, but it applies the idea of random is like, let's say I have a theory of one thing we've been researching is eating disorders, bulimia and anorexia. And we have 74 people who have bulimia or anorexia. We see certain things in their charts, so we see them. Are maybe that's not as unusual as it seems. I mean, the planets are changing direction, they're going retrograde. How do we know what an average person would have? You see my question? Because, for example, more babies are born in the morning, in the early morning, than during the day, unless you have a lot of cesarean sections, induced births, then they're born during office hours. I've been told by researchers in this field that in some countries, I think Brazil is one of them, like 75 or 80% or something like that, of the babies are born through an induced procedure, so they're born during the day. Well, if you're born during the day, the sun is going to be above the horizon, Mercury and Venus are going to be above the horizon. You know, there are political events, all kinds of things that change. So how do you know that something isn't just a random fluctuation of what people are doing? I mean, the obvious case is that born in countries where most babies are born during the day and you're seeing sun in the ninth and 10th houses, it's just the way it is. Um, Another example is that um, more people have Virgo and Libra rising in the northern hemisphere than Pisces and Aries because they take longer to rise. And if you don't know that and you see a bunch of people with Virgo and Libra, you might think, oh my God, they have Virgo. Well, most people do. So how do you compare to a random distribution? And the shuffled control group is fabulous for that. All you do is you take, like in the case of the people with eating disorders, I take the 74 people who have eating disorders, and we have a computer software shuffle their date, times, and places. So if we were taking everybody in this group, I might take my birth month, Christopher's birthday, Dave's birth year, Nelson's birthplace, mix them all together, and that becomes the control group. Control groups are extremely important. That's who we compare to. That shuffled control group will have the same distribution of birth times, seasons of the year, years they're born, extremely similar distribution, but the charts are different. So this has been one big step, and then developing the software to create these shuffled control groups is needed because you need software to shuffle them all together. That's a major breakthrough. Otherwise, before I had a shuffled control group in my own research, I was just comparing to some other group of people, and it's not a good control group. So there's a lot of tricks, a lot of things that can be done to ensure that what you're looking at is a deviation from like a random distribution. We don't have random data to select from. Most people are using things like the Gauquelin data or the Astro Data Bank. So you just deal with what you have. You have to, research is very practical. It's never perfect. Like Christopher, you mentioned with the research on the more aspects are, the more news items there are. The source for how many news items there are has nothing to do with astrology. So the possibility that astrology is contaminating the data or that in some way the researcher is influencing it is virtually impossible because you're using all of the data available from that source. And so that gives you very high confidence that you're dealing with an actual phenomenon, that somebody's collected how many events there are and without any regards to astrology or any particular biases. And you're using all of that data from that source. So yeah, you do the best you can, and it's always a battle to try to make sure that what you're finding is actually different than some random distribution and that the people you've selected actually represent something or the events you've selected.
Yeah. Santino,
Yeah.
I would add that one way to gain some confidence that what you're seeing is not just a random fluctuation that occurring. One way to do that, I think, is through replication, replicating the study on a different set of data. And consequently, I think it's just as important in astrology to not only do new studies to find new things, but also look at old studies that have been done and see if that result can be replicated on different data. And I've heard several times that in not just statistics applied to astrology, but statistics in general, that we have a replication crisis out there. People in social sciences, psychology, other areas, they're publishing all these studies and they're rarely getting replicated. So, we don't have as much confidence as we should that, the results are not just, random occurrences.
Oh, thank you so much for mentioning that, Christopher. It underscores the point of what a constant battle research is. It's never perfect. And you have to replicate before you have good confidence. So like with bipolar disorder research, we have not replicated it yet. We need to actually, well, I did replicate it. I did one replication study. So that was very, very important for increasing confidence. But in most cases, finding new data, going out, collecting new data, or finding a source for it, running the analysis again, extremely important. And also, I just want to underscore this additional point Christopher made, is that the other disciplines, they vary in how well they are doing. I mean, some of them are really, really sloppy in certain areas of medical research, very, very sloppy. And yeah, we don't want to do that in astrology. We want to, be basically, you don't want to exaggerate your findings. If you haven't done a replication, you should just be saying, okay, this is the first study. You don't want to exaggerate the importance of it. You don't want people applying these ideas with greater confidence than your research has shown. Yeah.
And Santina, this is Shravya. I'd like to add a point here, I guess. I'm not a pro astrologer. I'm just newbie, but I do have quite a bit of experience with machine learning and AI. So sometimes the big question I've always had, or my colleagues always had, is are we actually biased or is it an inherent pattern, right? So an example I can give you is if you're looking at Target website and trying to see who's going to purchase. Whoever is going to visit the site is going to purchase, is going to convert into a purchase, or just going to browse and leave. So should we look at people who are only visiting Target website, or should we look at people who are visiting Walmart website, which doesn't make sense, right? So there is inherent bias. Of course, we need to look at people who are, visiting Target website only. We need to know, who are going to purchase on Target. So many a times there is quite a lot of confusion between bias and inherent pattern, and so many times I realized there is patterns that we can overlook as biases. So just wanted to add that, I guess.
Thank you.
I
So
will,
if I understand what you're saying, we need to be clear about what it is we're looking at. Are we looking at people who are visiting? Are we looking at people who are buying? Um, and
Yes,
and not generalizing beyond what we've looked at. If we've looked at people visiting, that tells us who visits, doesn't tell us who buys. A lot of times in machine learning, it's applied to industry and they want actionable results that they can, improve their profits. But you have to be careful about exactly what it is you're looking at and what you can infer from that. And sometimes our personal desires get in the way. And, we want something so much that we generalize beyond what we can really conclude. Am I restating some of what you're getting at reasonably well?
yes. So I also wanted to say maybe I wasn't clear. So when we are looking at customers who are going to buy at Target, we will only see at the population of people who are visiting the Target website, right? We don't go looking for people who are visiting the Walmart website. All I'm trying to say here is, I guess it's not a bias sometimes when we are just looking at the Target customers, because that's how you feature engineer your variables. You narrow, there's a correlation, or there's some common sense that we apply and narrow down your work or try to reduce your um, computational efforts to put them towards the variables that matter the most. So is it a bias or is it a informed choice that we make? So there's that confusion always as a data scientist. To make to for me to be able to choose wisely what are the variables that I'm looking at versus what is the population that I should be looking at. So there's that um, trade-off always. So
Yeah,
sometimes bias is not really bias. It's an inherent pattern that we need to look for. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess.
right. So if you're studying people who go to the Target store and you're not looking at people who go to Walmart, it's telling you about Target store. It's not telling you if you infer something about purchases in general and you haven't tested your observations in a different context, you're generalizing in a very risky way. So,
Right.
the bias is actually just a focus on what it is you're able to, what you want to know. If you want
Exactly.
if you're working for Target, they want to know who's going to buy at Target. If you're working for a psychologist, they might want to know the psychology of buying, and then you're going to need to look at more things. This is why we're having colleagues and teams to double check, because a lot of times any researcher can miss the obvious. Like you think you're concluding one thing and you're not. Hey man, you're only looking at a Target store. What you're not finding out about purchasing in general. And oh, that's right. So, we're always overlooking things and having colleagues. Correct us and refine what we're doing. It's a gradual process of
And
getting clearer and clearer.
I wanted to add something. First of all, hello, first time here, so hope everyone is well. Pretty much more of a newbie to astrology. I've been doing it for about, I'll say about 2 years now. So probably newer than most people. I do Vedic astrology personally, but I wanted to just state a couple things that I think is important to remember with astrology is it's not a causal thing. It doesn't really cause anything. It's mirroring back energy and it reflects energy. And how we use that energy is it gives or introduces subjective differences. So, I don't think we'll always ever get the same type of conclusion for, a bunch of people. I think that's where the free will and energy element comes into play because energy is always, it's always changing, it's always flowing and things along those lines. And we're not talking about things that stop, and it's going to be there for a certain for a certain time frame. So we're dealing with energy, and again, it's always moving, and there's always going to be, in my opinion, a certain resonance with people because everything is the same in nature but different to a degree, and then that gets on the different aspects of the psyche and things along those lines. And people are biased. When you talk about things that they may not necessarily agree with you with because they're biased toward themselves, they may not be telling you the 100% truth, which could in turn affect results and conclusions and how you go about your research. So I just wanted to add those notes to the conversation. Great
Oh,
conversation, by the way.
yeah, thank you so much. Those are all excellent points. Um, just really excellent points. One of the things that we do in research is we pay a lot of
Us.
attention. Let me just finish this one point. We pay a lot of attention to effect sizes. Um, so what happens in a lot of research is if you have a lot of data, like if you have 1,000 cases of eating disorders or person becoming a billionaire or whatever it is you're interested in, great basketball player. If you have a lot of people, say 1,000, you might be looking at something that has only a very small effect. Like if Mars is supposed to be good for athletics, you might be finding that Mars helps a tiny bit with being a great sports champion. You can detect small effect sizes. We call it the effect size, how much difference it makes. So the idea is that there's going to be a huge amount of variability depending on free will, depending on zillions of variables, what the person's upbringing is, what they had, as we like to say, what they had for breakfast that day, it affects their athletic performance. We don't know what they had for breakfast, but it's going to affect their athletic performance. So there's so many things we don't know. And what we're trying to do in most astrological research and in other fields is just detect, is there some effect? Is there some effect from having Mars, like Gauquin said, basically in the 12th house? Does it do a little bit? We can detect that. And lots of things we don't detect, plus free will and other possibilities are, so we're just trying to find some signal in the noise.
Absolutely. And it's almost like we have to treat astrology or charts, natal charts, as it's like a meal. When we take a planet and we interpret it in their chart compared to everything else, it's like, we have a bunch of seasonings and Mars will be a certain seasoning. It's not the whole meal, but it changes the taste of it. And so that's how, I am learning to look at astrology. It's different seasonings and different ingredients to make, a certain meal. And it's just interesting. So I do, agree with that, especially, with Mars and things along those lines with sports. And, it deals with food a lot too. I've seen people with strong Mars placements are usually good cooks that are into, the restaurant business or things along those lines. So I agree with that, though. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And the exciting
Excellent.
thing is that using modern research methods, we can confirm some rules. I mean, we are doing it. A lot of astrologers have a feeling, well, no, it's too difficult or whatever. But like Christopher went through several studies, there are lots of other ones. We are finding stuff. And one of the things that helps to understand is small effect sizes can be detected. Because a lot of people who in astrology who talk to me and they say, "Oh, I don't know why you're doing research. Everybody's different and there's free will." Well, of course there is. We're not trying, you don't have to be that perfect. You only have to find a mild difference. And then that tells you that the astrology is one of the factors that's involved. And we have a lot of evidence now that astrology does actually work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Santino,
Yeah.
just on a kind of a personal observation, well, one, I know studies have shown that when you look at just a single factor, like say, Mars square Sun or Mars trine Moon, something like that, uh, and when you do find something which is statistically significant, usually those single factors result in small effect sizes. Uh, not very, very big effects. And on a personal level, I think that's kind of a blessing. I think that because so many things in astrology do just nudge us a little bit and produce small effect sizes, that's precisely why we're able to exercise our free will and modify the outcomes. In contrast to that, if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, gravity is going to produce a very big effect over and over again. You're going to fall and hit the ground and die. It's not going to be that people who jump out of planes without parachutes just die slightly more often than those who don't jump out.
Yeah.
So it's on a personal level, I think it's a good thing that most single factors in astrology produce small effect sizes. That allows us to,
Yeah.
deal with it on a personal level and make choices that produce better outcomes for ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, and what's very similar to astrology is genetics research. I mentioned it in several different places, videos in the book, etc. Um, and I've worked with the genetics researchers. They actually helped me with my research designs in astrology because we're using very similar research designs. And I didn't know this until I started talking to these people in genetics research that they found genetic indicators for all kinds of different problems, but the effect of one genetic marker is negligible. In fact, the effect size is so small, it's not even detectable. And you have like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of genetic markers that when you sum them all up, they might give something like a 2 or 3% increase in a tendency to, say, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That's how I got into it, studying genetics markers for bipolar disorder. And they have thousands of markers, and each one contributes about 1/100% of the likelihood of becoming bipolar disorder. So in genetics, they're facing the same issue of very, very tiny effect sizes and having to find lots of genetic markers. And then finally, it's visible. And in fact, some of the stuff they're doing is more difficult than what we're doing in astrology because sometimes we have 40 or 50 indicators of something, and that's enough to get visible results. So yeah, this is another big part of the research is that it might be that Mars in Aries inclines to aggression, but it might be that it's so small, it's not detectable until you combine it with other things. And then each one adds together and then it becomes noticeable. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
All right. What about our updating what we know about Mars in Aries? So now we have this old view of Mars in Aries, and we've been using those views for a long time. What about having a different view, a shifted view from what we normally have as Mars in Aries?
Yeah. That is,
Because what we have viewed for many years or thousands of years or hundreds of years may not be the truth. And we use that information to put in data, and then we have erroneous results. Just like not all Aries are in your face, or they tend to be more quiet people based on my observation.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, and the more volatile people tend to be more Cancer.
mhm.
It's a difference. I mean, it's the way we have it. Maybe is where we have it wrong in terms of placing that information and allowing it to be tested. Those are
Yeah,
the things that I think we have a problem in astrology. Our own views of planets and houses, and especially rulership. Rulership doesn't. I don't find that we have rulership. I find that planets we have affinity. More than one planets have an affinity for a house or a sign.
yeah. In the research community, there's maybe a dozen to 2 dozen researchers at most, people who are, really carrying out the research in detail. Among those researchers, I've become a bit of an iconoclast in that a lot of the things that I'm finding work are way, way, way outside the traditional ideas, and suggest that our meanings of planets and signs are quite, there's some similarity to what's been handed down, but quite different as well. So yeah, to me, this is one of the exciting possibilities in research is it can change your understanding, uh, and quite dramatically. I've been working very hard to try to confirm a lot of the standard ideas.
In
And
1,000 feet.
and so some of the new research, like the one you just mentioned, Christopher, I haven't looked at it yet on the mundane events thing. I'm sure that's confirming standard ideas. I'm very excited about that because I'm actually interested in finding more research that confirms standard astrological ideas. That's been personally difficult for me.
Yeah, and you have done a lot of research that you've made videos on precisely what was being talked about here. Through extreme case sampling, you have a whole series where you studied people who were extreme Aries, extreme Taurus, and so on, and you got results which were sort of in line with tradition, but not exactly the same as tradition.
Right,
Hmm.
right. And for example, with Aries, we found out what Desdell just said. We found no evidence that Aries is aggressive. And so this is, doesn't make me very popular among the astrological community. But what we found is that Aries goes its own way and it seeks authenticity. And it often will leave everybody. They'll live in isolation. They're seeking some kind of integrity and honesty. I don't know what takes more bravery than to be authentic and honest. So, but the physicality and aggressiveness, actually, this extreme Aries people had less of that than average. That might have been a random fluctuation, but there's no support for that idea using modern research methods. So yeah, it's exactly what Desdale's talking about. We're finding things not fitting a lot of ways, but there is some element that does connect back to the traditional idea.
Yeah,
There's something that's the same. Like most of it in a lot of cases is different, but there's something essentially the same. Some signs like Sagittarius was not so different from what people say, but other signs were pretty Pisces, very different from what we're told, but there's an element that's the same. So it's fascinating.
It's like you were saying. It's like you were saying the other day that, for example, you got a Mars in Aries. You would expect them to be very, robust, but the person that have that Mars in Aries, they deal with a lot of people that are robust. Instead of they having the feature of the sign, they having to deal with the people that are robust themselves. So those are the little cappings that the intricacy of what I'm talking about and the things that we do in astrology. We have to do a lot more updating of what we do to put in and plug in into the apparatus of evidence in what we do. Because we're going to go around doing the same thing and getting the same erroneous results.
Well,
And
research,
that's what
no, let
that's
me just interrupt.
and
Let me just interrupt. There's no problem with research repeating known ideas because research, by definition, is finding out what's actually occurring in the data. And if it's not in the data, it won't get confirmed. So, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about research is it tends to be neutral to these things. You're going to find out what is. And if you're looking for standard ideas and they don't work, you're never going to get positive results because they aren't there. Um, so there's a self-correcting mechanism in the research in that it tells you what reality is. It's telling you what the reality is. Is Aries aggressive or not? Well, we have very strong evidence it is not aggressive. I have more confidence in that than the traditional beliefs because according to modern research methods, doing controlled studies gives you greater confidence than traditional beliefs handed down and more confidence in personal experience. So you may or may not agree with that, but playing by the rules of modern research methods, we gain greater confidence from a well-designed controlled study. And so we have our confidence levels based on clear rules and regulations of what gives confidence. Christopher, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that you covered it quite well.
Okay, good. Yeah, the more people we have who are experienced researchers, the better, because there's just a lot of ways of looking at things. Okay, we've got a little bit of time left. Any other topics or questions? If not, I can tell you the latest thing that I'm playing with. Or anybody else want to share anything? Are we cool? Let me go in the chat, see.
David, it's Penelope.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. I'm just wondering if you might have a reference for an easy understanding of R and T scores. You know, the basic statistical scoring that you're using in your research.
Okay, yeah, that's worth talking about. Like,
Thank you.
p-values and t-values, that stuff.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well,
Just where you might have a quick spot that you get a summary from. I'd love to know what it is.
yeah, I mean, basically what happens is there are two things that researchers look at. I mean, there's more than two things, but two things that come to mind right now are p-values and effect sizes. In the end, these are often the two things we want to know about. And the p-value basically just tells you the probability of getting the results you're getting. So, it's very, very sophisticated mathematics. It's been put into software. Now you just click some buttons and it tells you. But the math behind it's pretty spectacular. So basically, with the shuffled control group, you can take any group of people, say, like I'm looking at people with eating disorders right now, and you can see what is in the group of people who have eating disorders, the shuffled control group that does not have eating disorders. And you could say, well, the people with eating disorders tend to have moon in Pisces, and maybe 20 people have moon in Pisces. But maybe in the shuffled control group, 15 people have moon in Pisces. Well, is 20 a lot more than 15? It's hard to say. What if 20 people have moon in Pisces who have eating disorders and only 10 in the shuffled control group? Is that a big difference or not? The beautiful thing about a p-value is it will tell you exactly how likely that is to happen by chance. it'll say the probability of that happening is 1 in 100,000. And you go, oh my God, I didn't know it was that unusual. Or it might say it's 25%, which is not very, 1 out of 4 times. It'll tell you what the probability of that difference is. So p-values make research possible because they're telling you, is there a big difference between the two groups? So that's all a p-value. P means basically probability. What's the probability of getting this? Now, there's a lot more than p-values and effect sizes, but let me mention this also, related to p-values, is exploratory research versus confirmatory research. And some research is more exploratory and some is more confirmatory. It's not always black and white. But if I find that more people who have eating disorders have moon in Pisces, and the probability is like 1 in 10,000 versus the shuffled control group, is that impressive? If I have 74 cases and I find out, gee, the probability is 1 in 10,000, is it an impressive, like, oh my God, people who have eating disorders have moon in Pisces? What a fantastic discovery. Did I discover anything? Well, there's several issues. One is, how many questions did I have? This is a big one. This is huge. Like if I was looking at every planet and every sign, I'm looking at hundreds or thousands of things, and each one of those has a chance of being true. The more questions you have, the less impressive the p-value is. And this is a rampant problem in astrology. People are just looking at data, finding something unusual and saying, oh, look, I found it. And there's a term for this called the Bonferroni correction. The Bonferroni correction is a typical correction we do to multiple questions. So moon in Pisces, or any particular astrological thing, if it's 1 in 10, if the p-value is 1 in 10,000, that is very impressive if that was your only question. If you said, oh, I bet people who have eating disorders have moon in Pisces, let me collect the data and compare, and they do, that's impressive. Like, we have some confidence that you found something. But if you were just looking at a bunch of things and you happen to notice that, it's not impressive. I mean, obviously. Like if I say, I bet your shirt is red, and I can't see you, and I'm right, that's impressive. But if I say, oh, I bet it's red, yellow, green, orange, blue, or purple, or brown, or white, or black, and I got it right, well, duh. I used up most of the colors. So the more questions you ask, the more likely it is. So there's, in the research we do, we have to be very sensitive to what questions are being asked and what is the probability given the number of questions being asked. And did you look at the data beforehand, and how did you collect the data? If they're your clients, you're probably unconsciously biasing the results by unconsciously picking clients who fit what you want. The power of the unconscious mind is huge, huge. And data scientists know this. That's why, the placebo effect is very powerful. If you think something's going to work, it will work. So that's what p-values are all about, the probability, but you cannot just take the probability by itself. You have to know the context of the research, how the research was done, how many questions were asked, and so on. And then within that context, you can see whether those p-values are inclining us to think you actually found something. And the other thing is the effect size. Let me go over that quickly. Let's say you randomly look at the height of 10 people in Germany and you randomly select 10 people, look at the height of 10 people in France. And the people in Germany are 1 inch taller. We will get a p-value when we do the statistical analysis, and the p-value is not going to be significant because you can't get, it's such a small difference with so few people. You don't actually know if they're taller. I mean, this is common sense, right? I mean, if I flip a coin 10 times and I get 7 heads, maybe it was just random fluctuation. But if I flip a coin 1,000 times or 10,000 times, I'm more confident in the result. So if I do this, if instead of 10 people, I do this for the entire population, and I get a 1 inch difference, the Germans are 1 inch taller on average than the French, I am going to have statistical significance. And I'm going to be very confident that on average, Germans are 1 inch taller than French. So I can have very high statistical significance with a very small effect size. You all follow that? If I took the height of every person in Germany and every person in France, or even just 10 million from each country, and the Germans are 1 inch taller, the statistics will tell you. That's the beautiful thing about statistics. You might say, well, gee, I don't think so. Well, you have a human brain. It's not as good as a math brain. And the math will tell you exactly what the probability is. Now, okay, Germans are taller than French. So, I'm a scout for a basketball team. So I'm going to go to Germany to look for basketball players. Well, 1 inch isn't going to make much difference. Maybe they have better basketball training in France. Any other thing going on is going to be much more important than that slight difference. So you can have something that's true, but it's not useful because the effect size is too small. So effect sizes are a big deal because they tell us how useful the information is. And as I said before, modern research methods can detect very small effect sizes. Give us high confidence that there's only a slight difference. You need more data. The more data you have, the better able you are to detect the effect size. And there are other things that get involved. So basically, research is about p-values and effect sizes within the context of how the research was done. And what problems were there in the research. And there are always problems with research. No research is ever perfect. No research is ever perfect, random, whatever. It's never perfect. It's, the better done the research is, the more confidence we have in it. It's all relative. Everything's about confidence levels. There's a joke about proof. Like people will say, oh, did your astrology prove anything? The joke about proof is there's only two people interested in proof. People that drink alcohol and mathematicians.
I'm the latter.
Yeah, Christopher's a mathematician.
I like
If
that
you
kind
drink
of.
alcohol, you want to know what the proof is, the percentage of alcohol in the alcohol. But in research, there's never a proof. There's
Yeah.
just levels of confidence. And so you gradually improve the levels of confidence. The good news, that's the bad news. The good news is that most professions now have implemented pretty strict rules about how you determine confidence. So we have pretty strict guidelines. So you can't, it's not like politics or something where people just argue forever. We have guidelines. Like I said, a good modern controlled research study gives more confidence than 2,000 years of tradition or an expert telling you something. because when those things have been tested, very often they were found not to be true. But a properly designed study, and if it's replicated, oh my God, then your confidence goes way up. So it's all about confidence levels.
Mhm. Another thing, Santino, that
Yeah.
I think researchers are just now being encouraged more and more to include in their studies, sorry, are estimates of statistical power,
Yeah.
where power is your, sorry, got something in my throat, but power is, I'd say you can think of it as your ability to detect the effect when the effect actually exists.
Yeah.
And power usually goes up as the size of your sample goes up. And we now know that in the early days of applying statistics to astrology, a lot of results came back negative because the sample sizes were too small,
Right.
did not have enough statistical power to detect
Exactly.
that were actually there.
Exactly. You know, all research people think the same way. I had the word power in the back of my mind while I was talking. And I'm glad you followed up with that, because that's such an important point. Because let me underscore this point that Christopher just made, because it's so important. You can do a study, say it's on a vitamin or a mineral or a drug, and you can say, oh, we gave vitamin C to these people and it didn't work. No support for it. How many people? I mean, it's not that simple. You have to look at all the details of the study, because many times something is working, but it's not working big enough to detect it with the power of your study. Power in statistics means exactly what Christopher said. It's your ability to see the effect. The effect can be there. Vitamin C might be helping with your cold or whatever, but it may not be strong enough for you to see it. And how can you detect the effect of the vitamin C if it's not strong enough for me to see? One easy thing to do, I mean, conceptually easy, is to have a larger sample size, more people. The more people you're studying, the easier it is to detect small effect sizes. So that's why, in the old days, if you go back 50 years ago, it's amazing how primitive their thinking was. They very often were not thinking about the power of the statistical test. And they would just say, oh, we didn't find anything. It's like, oh my God, you guys are not very smart. I mean, we've learned a lot in 50 years or 60 years or 70 years. We've become more sensitive to all of these issues. I mean, in a lot of research, they weren't even looking at effect sizes. I mean, how dumb is that? So, research methodology has gotten so much better, and the data mining, oh my God. I mean, the knowledge discovery, the ability to go in, all this stuff is new, to go in and find relationships. So it's an exciting field. And also the tools to actually do it are just um, fantastic compared to what we had in the past. So yeah, all of this is to answer Penelope's question about some basics of research. What's it all about? It's about p-values and effect sizes, and exactly what are you doing? Are you doing exploratory research, um, confirmatory research, and how exploratory is it? Um, we're often told that p less than 0.5 or 0.1, less than 1 out of 100, is a good result. That's only for a strict hypothesis test. P less than 0.1 is for strict hypothesis tests. Strict hypothesis test means I believe people with eating disorders have moon in Pisces. Like, boom, I have a very clear idea. I collect new data and I analyze it. If you're not doing that, then P less than 0.01 is just not that impressive. It's a start, it's better than nothing, but not a lot better than nothing. Um, so it all depends on exactly what you're doing. And that's one of the things you might tell by how animated I'm getting. That really bugs me. in astrology research is people are not doing strict hypothesis tests and they're using cutoff points like p less than 0.01. For me personally, that's just wrong. You know, Christopher, what are your thoughts on that? Am I going too far with this?
Well, it's if it's not less than 0.01, like if you had a p-value of 0.04, it's less than 0.05, which has for a long time been the cutoff point, but most people today would look at that as sort of only weakly statistically
Yeah,
significant.
but my distinction between confirmatory and like a strict hypothesis test is that I think we should only be using those p cutoff points of 0.01, 0.05 for a strict hypothesis test. Let me add one more thing. In the research that we did, for example, in bipolar disorder, we have several rules when we're doing the exploratory level, the knowledge discovery, data mining level of things. One is we have a p-value of less than 0.001 if it's exploratory. We have to have some theoretical justification is another requirement for the formula we come up with. If it's all new stuff, we want even a better p-value. And the formula that we come up with, the collection of variables, has to use consistent rules, like use the same orb for all the same aspects, don't skip anything, it has to be extremely consistent. So in our exploratory research, we require P less than 0.001, the theoretically simple formula, and theoretical support. If any of those is missing, like we saw something, but there's no theory to support it, we want even a better p-value. So, I make a big distinction between exploratory requirements and confirmatory, and that's consistent with the idea of a Bonferroni correction. And I just find a lot of astrology research is sloppy in that regards. Now, if you find P less than 0.01 and you're doing exploratory research, well, maybe you found something. In my experience, it almost never works. I mean, I've had so many failures one after another. I find if I'm not at 0.001 with the other requirements, it's just not going to hold up.
Yeah.
Santino, I just wanted to mention real quick on the cosmobiology.org, we do have the research guidelines that are posted. There is mention of the P and T values in here. I was just kind of reviewing those real quick. But if you, which would be great for everybody to review, there's a condensed version and there's a longer version that have been put together by the board. So just go to cosmobiology.org. It's under the research tab. So lots of information on research guidelines there. But also, if you have some sort of resource, or maybe we can create one, I know it might be hard to get a consensus on what we're looking for as far as those values. And do you know what I'm saying? It might be good to
Yeah.
have something like that as a guideline to go off of as
Yeah, I
well.
think it is mentioned in the complete version about higher
It is, yeah.
p-values. Yeah, I think it's in there. So yeah, Angela, thank you for mentioning this. If you go to cosmobiology.org, which of course is Cosmobiology Institute website, and you click on the research tab, here are the research guidelines, a shorter version and the long version. And I have to admit, I'm very proud of these. Vincent Godbout did a lot of work on this. A lot of people on the, uh, Peter Neumann, a lot of people involved in helping develop these guidelines, and I think they're really good. And so a lot of the things we're talking about are mentioned in the guidelines.
Good.
Yeah. So this is one of the first things, the Cosmobiology Institute, we're having these programs for education and sharing and collaboration on research. We're providing educational information. We have a lot of big plans to move research forward. So it's starting up. Yeah. So I
I
highly
think
recommend reading
that
them.
what would be good too is if you have a good like online link that you feel confident in that explains these terminologies. Like I know you can kind of Google online so that people who are new to research can really understand And when they look at it in writing, what the terms are and things like that. I found a few, but I can send them to you, Santino, to see if they like meet your criteria, but
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to
yeah,
be the source for that.
yeah. Go ahead and send that to me.
Okay.
There was just this Kepler Day. The other group that does research is the headed by Robert Curry with a Correlation magazine in the United Kingdom, and Robert sent out a list of terms, research terms, ahead of the conference. He said he threw it together very quickly. I thought it was excellent. I mean, it really went over. I just thought he did a really good job. He said, "Oh, I didn't want, I just threw it together real quickly." But yeah, I think some more things that the research guidelines go through all that, but it probably maybe in more detail than you want. I think just going into some basic terminology like I did here and concepts could be helpful. One of the problems with research is there are so many kinds of research and so many different situations that no matter what you do, you're going to leave something out for somebody. It's kind of like, let me explain what music is or something. It's like, there's a lot of kinds of music out there. Like, I'm not sure where to start. And research, I've picked a few things that I think are relevant to what we're discussing here, but it's just a big area. But yeah, we need to have some more, I agree, resources for that. Christopher, anybody else, are you aware of any good resources for basic research methods information?
Oh, I know there are lots of resources online, and actually, you can just ask something like, Chat GPT or Microsoft's Copilot questions about statistics and research. And it often comes back with pretty good answers and will refer you to websites for more.
Yeah, I don't want, yeah, that's very good. I agree. I don't want to mention my own stuff too much, but if you go to my website, astrologydc.com, I just changed it this past week. When you go to it now, the first thing you see is this index to videos. And I used to require you to pay for it. Now I just made it all free. But there's all these topics, and if you go down to theory and research, and here's research methods fundamentals. So these are tutorial videos, and here's astrology research, how to do it. And then this thing in 7 parts, essentials of astrology research. So if you're into watching tutorial videos, this will be very helpful. And it goes through all these ideas as well. Um, yeah, and a bunch of other things. And then there's other things like research methods, issues, and options. This is all about different issues, about data visualization, extreme case sampling, outliers, correlations, etc., bias and corruption in research, how to prevent it. So this goes into a lot of different topics, but it's not concise. I mean, there's just each video is about a half hour long. So um, it's a lot of information, but like the research guidelines at Cosmobiology Institute website, it's more extensive. And so I think having something more abbreviated might be helpful.
We are also planning to do a larger presentation meeting with everybody on February 21st, dealing with more software ideas and how people can utilize the software in different programs that currently exist that are out there. So we're working on pulling that together. Most likely it will be February 21st, just to let everybody know.
Yeah, and that's in addition to this monthly research meeting. So the monthly research meeting on the fourth Tuesday, um, that's available. And then periodically, Cosmobiology Institute has you might say special program. Next one we expect to be on February 21st, and probably on um, software tools for research, what people are doing. Um, I mean, what's out there and how do you use it and what questions do people have and how things like that. And we'll be inviting different people to present on that. Okay, we're 11 minutes over. I think we covered a lot of stuff. This meeting is for you. Just let me know. I think you all have my email, or email in, the Cosmobiology Institute email. That'll work as well. Wherever you want things to go, whatever you're interested in, and whether this is working for you or not. Okay, are we good? Any last things here? Think we're good. I'm looking at the chat. All right. Yeah, Angela put the email info@cosmobiologyinstitute.org is an email that works. Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming. I'm just excited that evidence-based astrology is here, man. It's happening. And the more people that do it and move forward, I'm just excited because I think this is the future. I think astrology works, and this is like the Wright brothers getting the first airplane to fly for 30 seconds or something. That's
Yes.
just my intuition about it. I think we're at the beginning of a revolution. I mean, this might sound hyperbolic, but I think we're creating a whole new discipline. This is like a real thing. It's not a joke. It actually works. And I can't wait to uh, find out about some of the research that Christopher found out about. Was that presented at the Kepler Day? I have the videos. I wasn't able to make it live.
Yeah, I did the keynote there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be hearing it.
It was who will be the founding fathers of modern scientific astrology?
Oh, cool. Okay, so yeah, I registered for it, but I couldn't make it live. But I'll be watching you and everybody else with the presentations. Very excited about it. So Robert Curry over in England is, we're working together. He's leading great stuff there.
Mhm.
Okay, I will see you next month. Hopefully, February 21st is the likely date as well. So thank you so much, and hope to see you next time. Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.